Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series, Adapting to the New Reality, Civically Engaged Universities Offer Strategies and Hope. My name is Erin Canan. I'm the Dean of Civic Engagement at Bard College, and I'm the moderator for our webinar today. And I'm thrilled to be here with our panelists. The webinar series is a collaboration between the Open Society University Network and the Telwar Network. We announced the series last month. The goal is for us to collect and share stories of institutions and individuals who are taking action to mitigate the crisis, document practical steps and strategies that may be of use to you, and provide uplifting content and strengthening public support for engaged universities. This is a two-part series. First, it's a 6-month webinar series. And second, it is a student engagement series where we are issuing awards for undergraduates who have pivoted their community engagement in the time of crisis and responding to the issues in their own communities. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the session. A bit about the Open Society University Network. It's a new project that was announced in January. It's a collaborative project between Bard College, Central European University, and the Open Society Foundation. It integrates learning and the advancement of knowledge across geographic and demographic boundaries through credit-bearing and project-based collaborations in a wide range of academic and civic engagement programs that expands access to higher education and its resources to underserved communities. This includes research, network classes, coordination of academic programs, and promotes collaboration through the development of projects, programs, and partnerships with colleges, universities, and community partners. In addition, last month we announced a partnership with the Telwar Network, which many of you know is an international association of institutions committed to strengthening the civic roles and social responsibilities of higher education institutions that has built a global movement of engaged universities. Telwar joined with OSIN to launch the series alongside a call for submissions for the Student Award. So we are incredibly privileged to be here today with a number of experts with distinguished research and teaching careers that span the world, span disciplines and fields, and span expertise. There's perspective on the implications and possible response to the crisis for their field, for teaching and research, and for universities and their communities can provide lots of insights for all of us today. I'm going to introduce them, and then they are going to speak for about 5 minutes or so. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we will open up to audience questions as well. If you have a question, just go to the question and answer bar at the bottom of your screen, submit the question. We do have somebody moderating the questions for us. So joining me today, Dr. Felicia Keesing, who is a professor of biology and ecology at Bard College. She studies infectious disease as it relates to the loss of biodiversity. She studies the consequences of interactions among species, particularly as biodiversity declines. She's worked in Kenya for 25 years, investigating impacts of the loss of large mammals. And in the US, she studies how interactions among species influence disease risk for humans. Dr. Diana Erg-Vorsatz is a professor of environmental sciences at Central European University and is the director of CEU's Center for Climate Change and Sustainable Energy Policy. Diana's research is in environmental and energy studies, primarily focused on climate change mitigation. Professor Dr. Fatima Jahangir is both a practicing physician and assistant professor at Ziauddin University and practices medicine in Pakistan. She's working on the front lines treating patients at clinics while teaching medical students. She's witnessing impacts both on the ground and in the classroom. Professor Dr. Carol Ma is Associate Professor and Head of the Gerontology Program at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. She's a Senior Fellow in the Office of Community Engagement and Service Learning. Carol's working with colleagues globally to develop strategies to work with communities that are highest risk. Dr. Sue Pa is a professor of oral pathology and oral medicine at the School of Dentistry at the International Medical University in Malaysia. She's also the Dean for Community Engagement and is responsible for coordinating the university's community partnerships. She's both teaching and managing these collaborations as she identifies ways to respond to the crisis, both for her students and her community partners. We're going to start with Felicia.
Hello, everyone. It's a tremendous honor to be here on this panel with such a distinguished group of fellow practitioners and women, I might add. I am going to mention 5 things that I am seeing here at Bard College, where I'm the chair of the biology program. And I'm going to mention them each briefly, but if any of these is particularly interesting, I hope we can talk more about it in the question and answer. So the first thing is that I am a professor. I teach biology to undergraduates. And one of the things that to set the context for what I'm doing now, it's obvious, as I think just about every institution around the world, we've gone remote. And so all of my classes and my advising is now taking place over a similar format to this, over Zoom. And that has really changed relationships. Much of that, I would say, has been a loss because I miss the day-to-day face-to-face interactions with students. But I wanted to highlight some things that I see as advantages. And one of those is that we are getting to know each other now in challenging circumstances, in a time that's trying, and it's causing us all to draw on our on inner resources and to be open and honest with each other about our challenges in ways that I'm not sure we always reach when we're face to face and within the bubble that is regular undergraduate instruction. I also think that the fact that they see me in my dining room or occasionally interacting with my kids during office hours or when I'm talking to them around class time kind of opens up a portal into my life in the same way that I have a portal into their lives. And so I'm finding a kind of enriching of human connections, ironically, at a time when the face-to-face connections are curtailed in other ways. So that's one point that I think a lot of us are living through right now and are finding connections to. I wanted to mention another thing, which is that, as Erin mentioned, my research is on the ecology of infectious diseases. And I study particularly how the loss of biodiversity affects the probability that an infectious pathogen like the virus that causes COVID-19 will jump to people, and what kinds of actions we can take that would actually prevent that from happening in the future. So and one of the things, I guess, again, spinning positively, my colleagues and I have long predicted that something like this would happen, and we've had trouble getting people to listen to us. One of the hopeful things is the degree to which people are listening now. And so I've had countless interviews. There are lots of documentaries being made. There are lots of policymakers getting in touch. So the kind of recognition that there's something to learn from this and that we can actually invest in that is very apparent to me right now. I'm giving lots of talks and lots of interviews, and I appreciate the degree to which the relevance of the work that I do and that so many other scientists and health practitioners do is being recognized right now. We have a moment to make a real difference in people's lives now and into the future, and I'm appreciating that. On the spirit of that quest for that I see for people to understand more what's going on and where they're appreciating learning from me and my colleagues about what I do. I see that, again, more broadly with people who have other kinds of expertise. At Bard College, we started right after we went to remote instruction and the students left campus. We started a series called Ask an Expert. This was started by the dean and myself. And in this series, we post basically a daily short insight from a faculty member or a staff member who has some particular expertise that's relevant to the moment we're living through. And we started it not knowing where it would go, but it's become this incredibly successful series with hundreds of people subscribed to it, reading the daily updates. And these are things from, what makes this virus different from other viruses that have jumped? Why has this one been the one that spread? What are its characteristics? To what's the evidence behind face masks and their effectiveness? To what's the history of plagues in literature and how have those manifested themselves? To what can we do to support our children through this? So it's been this incredibly wide-ranging series and very successful. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that we've been teaching at Bard for about 10 years, a common course on science literacy that we call Citizen Science. We redesigned that series about 2 years ago, and in that redesign, we redesigned it right after President Trump had been, elected, and I don't know why that's making me choke. And so we had this very particular political moment in mind, that we felt students as citizens needed to understand how to deal with a world in which, in the United States, science is being science is under attack. You know, this was inspired in part by the March for Science that was held around the world, and other events. And so we redesigned the course to really prepare students for how to use science in their daily lives in a really practical way, and how to recognize science in the civic sphere, and access the science that they need in the civic sphere. We, again, had anticipated it in a particular political moment, but we had no idea how incredibly useful the skills that we were teaching all of these undergraduates, and that we've now taught them in 2 years in this revised curriculum. And it could not have been, I would say, better designed for the particular moment that we find ourselves in. And so I'm incredibly proud of that science literacy class, and of the skills that we've given to these students who are now navigating this very real civic moment where science plays such a big role. And with that, I will stop and look forward to hearing what my colleagues around the world have to say.
Wonderful, thank you. Diana?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me, and thank you very much for the invitation. And it's fascinating to be on this really amazing panel, as Felicia already has already introduced, that it's especially fantastic to be among so many high-powered women. I want to build on what Felicia already mentioned, that as an environmental scientist, this crisis for us is perhaps the opportunity of our lifetimes. In fact, I do think that this is the opportunity of a historic opportunity for us. And this fundamentally shapes also the research and education priorities that we presently have. First of all, Felicia already outlined why the strong connection between biodiversity and the present pandemic, and also the risk of future pandemics. So it's clear that one way we have to come out of this crisis is to restructure our connection with nature. Because unless we do that, it's really whole civilization is at risk. And as an environmental scientist, we kept warning the world already that climate change is already a severe threat to the future long-term survival of civilization. Now, this combined also to the future risks of next pandemics, we truly believe that this is such a strong alarm signal right now that humanity needs to understand that we cannot just rebuild exactly the same what was before, or this is basically a death sentence in the long run to both civilization and perhaps the human race. With that is of course a bit stronger statement. However, this is also an opportunity, because we have a better chance to rebuild many things in the economy than before. Because if there is a tornado, you have a chance to rebuild your city. Then you won't rebuild exactly the same old buildings with the same cracks, with the same already outdated technologies, but you want to use the 21st century technology, 21st century visions. So at the same time, we want to rebuild the economy, we want to rebuild biodiversity or our connection to nature. And at the same time, this is also an opportunity to tackle the climate crisis. Why? Because governments are going to spend anywhere between 5 to 28% of their GDP on the economic revival. At the same time, only 2.5% of the GDP spent annually from now on would be sufficient just to tackle climate change. So even though that right now we won't have a lot of attention on climate change, and budgets and research attention is dwindling on that, but it's not a problem, because simply if we watch out that we do the right decisions for rebuilding the economy, then we already will be able to tackle many things at the same time. And that is a tremendous research opportunity, because another momentum which this crisis gives us, because research says that behavioral sciences say that normally we are not very easily changing our behaviors. So just information will not help us behave more environmentally friendly. Nevertheless, big changes in the lives of people, for example, when they get married, or when they when they change jobs or they move to another place, that is exactly when we do observe that significant changes in behavior happen. And that's when also adaptation of new environmentally more friendly lifestyles often occur. Now, this is a massive global scale impact of everybody's life, basically almost all over the planet. So it's a massive opportunity also to change these lives. Nevertheless, a lot of research right now shows that actually people do want to change and do want to change towards more environmentally friendly and economically and pandemic friendly behaviors. So they do value their well-being more than economic growth. So this is now what we have to understand much better, and all our research to align with what are the aspects of the present change that we can really leverage into the future. For example, how can we build our cities better and change them for the long term, that they also serve solutions to climate change as well as future pandemics. Equally, what do we do with long distance travel? Can we change all of this in a way that we come out of these three crises that happen at the same time in a positive way? Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to discuss these.
Thank you. Fatima?
Hello. Thank you for having me. And I find it so interesting that we are sitting together to find solutions, to share our stories and find solutions to a common agenda. The experts are sitting together. Never in history before I remember that people from around the world have sat together to find solutions for a thing that is facing the whole humanity. Isn't it so wonderful? So in this unprecedented times, when COVID-19 has taken a toll on all sectors, we are heading inevitably to a deep global recession. So I think that if learning, teaching, and academics are compromised, then we will have to pay lifelong penalties. Universities are now emerging with smart amendments in terms of teaching, teaching modes, and and their access to healthcare, so that we can steer through this pandemic effectively. Ziauddin University in Pakistan is working hard to sustain the pandemic crisis. Various challenges have been encountered, and the first and the foremost was the safety and the safety of our staff, our students. So after the lockdown, we did a whole transition to online curriculum, online facilitation. So we made sure that it's all not just lecture-based, but we encouraged small group activities, problem-based learning, and case-based learning is reinforced with the help of IT department, and it was of incredible help. Initially, there were a few glitches, but with time, it went on quite smoothly. So we took it this way, that the first 2 years, which are total classroom teaching, we did it online. And then the practicals like biochemistry, anatomy, physiology, all the practicals will be dealt with later with the physical presence when everything resumes. For example, we can't do DNA extraction, gene sequencing without being there physically in the lab. So we are doing all theoretical classes online, and all the practicals will be done in a crash course when everything resumes. But we lack the robust classroom interaction with the teacher-student interaction, and the enthusiasm that is there in the classroom is the one thing that we lack, and we are working hard on it so that we can have an interactive based session. Also, then from the year 3, students go into clinical rotations, clinical clerkships, and then we have the procedural skills. They have to learn the hands-on skills. That is also lacking. So we are now working on simulator-based sessions, so that we can have virtual models on which we can work, and we're trying our best to do learning that way. Our second challenge was again an effective healthcare running, and that was our primary care is the backbone of ER. ER people are busy in COVID patients, so we have to deal with the community problems robustly. And for that, we made sure that all the faculty members are present, nobody was on leave. And then we made sure, because, you know, if we stopped, like, for example, routine vaccination is stopped, we are going to fear infectious diseases outbreak later on. So we had to think that primary care clinics cannot be shut down at any cost, because we want to work on precautionary measures, preventive aspects, so that minor ailments are dealt with at primary care, so that the hospital burden is reduced. The tertiary care centers are not could not deal with those illnesses. Secondly, the economic crisis that people are facing, because people have lost jobs, and if they're not going to handle that their minor things in primary care, it will be a worse chaos than COVID-19. Our universities, the media sciences department is also left no stone unturned, because it is also for general public. It is they are on television. They are giving messages to how to do social distancing, how to take precautionary measures. And, you know, the uncertainty is giving a feeling of despair, and we feel that long-term repercussions will happen, and that due to this mental trauma. So we are working hard to give home routine exercise regimes to general public, so that there's a feeling of hope. And not to forget that every cloud has a silver lining. This pandemic has taught us many things, that IT business is going to bloom later on. We need softwares in terms of in every sector, for example, in all fields, like taking assessments, medicine, etc. Also, social distancing has taught us that communicable diseases are decreased. For example, diarrhea, people are eating from their home-based hygienic food. So there are less incidences of diarrhea. Even road traffic accidents have decreased. And this crisis has taught us the need for preparedness for future crises. We must all have our effective plan B, so that anytime in future, God forbid, if we have such upheaval, we can work with new models already with us. We must preserve the culture of change that has swept across universities all over the course of just a few weeks. We should adapt to respond to the demands of the digital era, not to forget that there will be survival of the fittest in the future. So universities have to work to bring better workforce who can use technology smartly and work with collaboration. So I hope that in post-corona world will be working in hands in hand and with collaboration rather than in isolation, so that we can help each other out. We can sit together like we are sitting right now and helping each other out in this, and to help the humanity at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And thank you for all your work. Carol, you're next.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Carol. It's just my honor to share about our experience. And I think COVID-19 changed our life. Yeah, it is also time for us to think about not only about the relationship with the lecture, but also the relationship with myself and also ourselves and also family, colleagues, and also community. Actually, in Singapore, since 7th of April, we start to have circuit breaker measure, which is aimed to bring down community cases. And that means only essential services are open. We actually work from home, have online teaching or home-based learning for the students. With the current situation, we need to understand why there is such measure implement, and we also need to protect ourselves not to get infected. We also need to have hope and also appreciate what we have, even though we have lots of restrictions, like working from home. And we have to adapt this. This is actually a new life and new working style also. This is also a good time for us to reflect and also consolidate what we have and how we can support each other during the COVID. As the in charge of the Master and PhD Gerontology program at Singapore University of Social Sciences, I've been thinking about what we can do more with the community. Especially, we have our students, alumni, faculty members are all caring for the community, especially our elderly group, which is always seen as vulnerable group during the COVID-19. We have to remind ourselves we are practicing social distancing, but it doesn't mean that we need to practice social isolations. So I always think about we need to take this opportunity to care for each other. So my university focus more on lifelong learning, apply research, and also emphasize a lot on university social responsibility. Our education philosophy are heart habits. So university-wide, our university care for staff and students' well-being a lot. We understand that, as I mentioned, we need to support each other during this difficult time. University also provide counseling services and also set up a students' care fund to support those students who are affected during the COVID. And we even, as a faculty members and staff, we even get some allowance, from the university during this work from home period. Community-wide, my program actually organized a series of health and wellness silver seminar for senior and caregiver with community organizations. Our students, alumni, faculty members, and community partners, we work together to organize these webinars, topic related to nutrition, happiness, lifelong learning, family relationship, and we have even invite elderly who age 70 or above to share about their life during this difficult time and how they adapt it and how we can actually, think it positively. We also have elderly who age 82 years old and tell us it's the first time that they use Zoom, and to learn about, different topic. We also have family members and elderly to do exercise together in front of Zoom. This kind of seminar actually help us to connect to each other. So other than that, we will also organize a seminar if you are interested. Actually, what we will do is because of the COVID-19, we understand that a lot of elder care operators, they actually have a hard time to think of how they can take care of the elderly in front of so many restrictions. So we decide to contact our friends and partners from Asia to share about their experience and best practice during the COVID. We will have partners from Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Taiwan to talk about their experience. Other than that, we also have, working with different social enterprise in Singapore. So I actually have the founder of SG Assist in the webinar also, Adrian. And SG Assist actually is our community partners, and they have a digital platform. You can actually search their information through website. It is a kind of modern time bank. They connect volunteers and people who funding help in real time during the COVID. They have recruited more than 2,300 volunteers to provide support who are in need also. So what we find out, actually technology connect us during the COVID. This makes us to rethink about teaching and learning, sharing and caring, which can be done without a border. So just like what we have now in this webinar, because we have people from around the world, and then we try to learn from each other and share about our practice. There are a lot of things that we can do. We need to be positive, hopeful for what we have. I want to share one of the quotes from our elderly participants, how to see COVID as a concluding remark. She said, C is for connecting, O is for oneness, V is for visualization, I is for insight, D is dormant. If we can all connect and collectively see the oneness of humanity, if we can take time to sit quietly and visualize the whole of humanity coming together, visualizing the virus going back to where it has come from and remain dormant. This is a very powerful technique to heal the world of the present situations. Again, time for us to have a deep reflections or even a deep breath, and think of a constructive actions that we can do with or for the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those hopeful words. Sue?
Hi, I am Swan Haig from Malaysia. I'm really deeply honored to be on this panelist amongst these distinguished ladies, and we're sharing so many things from across the world. I am inspired already hearing from all the panelists before me. So I think following up from what the rest have done, I'm also going to share from our experiences in Malaysia and from my university. I think if we sit back, what this COVID has revealed to us is human vulnerabilities, and is showcasing the importance of good leadership and well-functioning universal social and healthcare systems. It is a wake-up call for that our well-being is closely tied to the health of the planet. So in the following explanations, I'm just going to illustrate to you what that actually meant to me to our community in Malaysia. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we, like many countries, we've had the warnings. And again, I being a woman of science, a professor in oral pathology and oral medicine, we brought up in science. So science is an integral part of how I have been and grown up. But yet we have also witnessed in parts of the world a decline, as was discovered that day, discussed that day, a decline in the respect for evidence and also advice from subject-specific experts. So as an observer here, it appears as though if empirical reality does not matter, nor does empirical reasoning form the basis of public policy, what do we have? So sometimes when I read news or we get this circulation around, it seems as though the political space has grown to become increasingly anti-intellectual to a certain extent, and emotions and personal belief seem to prevail compared to take precedence compared to objective facts and evidence in terms of influencing public opinion. So, but who am I to judge? I am looking from this side of the world. So we had this small discussion the other day. On this side of the world, thankfully, we are not really seeing much of this at the moment. But in the same breath, I hasten to say it doesn't mean that we're immune to it. That is not ever going to happen. If we let our guards down, I think it's just a matter of time that this is going to happen. Here in Asia, there's still much faith in science. So the public is quite discerning in terms of evidence-based reports. So this is probably largely due to leadership who practices evidence-based healthcare, and public advocacy is so important. The role of mass media is imperative, and therefore some kind of a force of the majority plays an important role, I feel. And never before has society in such a short span of time, they've had to quickly learn to comprehend what COVID testing actually means, what actually is PCR methods and other methods, what contact tracing actually means. These are pretty much technical in normal terms. But now society, for the sake of survival and keeping up with the news, for their own safety, people are pushed to quickly learn. This is what we've observed in our country. They have to learn what contact tracing entails and why is it so important, what's the modus operandi, figuring out what flattening the curve actually means. Nobody ever had to learn this before. So we can say this is one of those positive things that have come out in the past 2-3 months, right? So when we are faced with quote unquote fake news or quote unquote alternative truths, then we are forced to examine it, try to fall back on science for what it's worth. Science is what we've been taught. Science is what the society have been taught to. So I think what has come out of this is education for the masses, for the community is absolutely important. So this is bottom up. Top down, the leadership will have to be strong enough to remain on science. Science is, we have to listen to science. I think this COVID pandemic is also teaching us with examples from somewhat failed countries, and we look at those countries which appear to have been very successful. I think science leads the way. So I think this is the main message that we as a university, I feel moving forward, we have a very strong, very important role to play, especially in 2 ways: public advocacy, at the same time educating the community, supporting them, and at the same time giving them this message. So this is what we were kind of forced to do in a very short space of time. In these past 2-3 months during the what we call in Malaysia the movement control order, which is like a lockdown, where we were all staying at homes, but we felt there was something out there that we need to reach out. So whilst we were caught up like, with a good heart, trying to give and provide to those in need. At the same time, the university felt there was a very strong urge to have to also help these communities to help themselves during this time. And nothing beats giving them the right resources to be able to fend for themselves during this time. And this goes way beyond just giving immediacy, food, provisions, groceries. So all that is very important. So I felt in this country, this is what has revealed itself in the past 2-3 months. Humanity and social science is probably something that has brought to the fore. It has never been as important as before. It has been important. It was appreciated, but this is brought right to the fore, right onto your doorsteps. How do we respond to society during these moments? So these sort of things come to the fore. I shouldn't say thanks to COVID, but it was a blessing in disguise. I'm sure we have a lot more to talk about, to discuss with my distinguished panelists in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been incredibly insightful. And a couple of things that I just noticed is that all of your focus has authentically been so positive, and looking forward and looking for ways to use this moment to learn from. So in some ways, educators are always students, right? So we're always looking for ways to learn. My first question for you, I want to remind the audience that if you have a question, go to the Q&A on the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A little box if you want to ask your questions there. That would be wonderful. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then we'll go to your questions. My first question, given all of the optimism and given the conversation about using science, using the role of universities to engage with community, what role do you see sort of from practical or teaching or research-based practices, what role do you see universities needing to play as we move forward? What responsibilities do we have to use our research, access to sciences and the social sciences and other disciplines to actively address the crisis moving forward? So what role do you see universities needing to play to reinforce some of what you were talking about today? Whoever wants to begin. Diana, you had a hand up? Is that? Yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you for the question. Absolutely. I think now more than ever, we are really needed. Universities and research institutions are very much needed to help these, both the recovery effort and us getting out of this. It was very interesting to hear my fellow panelists discussing exactly the challenge of the public, perhaps, and especially decision-making, perhaps looking less to evidence than we would hope so. At the same time, I think also there is the challenge that sometimes, at least in Europe, sometimes evidence wasn't always aligned. So there was, since this is a totally new pandemic, so it was actually another challenge for decision makers is how to face potentially conflicting scientific evidence, potentially conflicting scientific advice, and how to still take decisions under uncertainty. And that's very much, very similar under also climate change, where we also don't have a lot of, there was for a long time conflicting evidence or conflicting scientific perspectives. And I think this is where also our great responsibility is for universities, how to recognize that there are perhaps opposing or at least not necessarily fully agreeing scientific perspectives and facts, but how to reconcile these and how still to provide advice to decision makers to act perhaps using the precautionary principle or different what other regimes do we have, how to still exercise responsible governance. And this all also facing the issue that also many of you already touched upon, that especially in democratic societies, you also need to listen to your voters. So how, and to citizenry, what they expect you. And these all may be conflicting such a pandemic. So this is why I think universities are especially important to, for us to navigate and to give advice. On the other hand, I also think this is tremendously responsible for us, that to translate this into our education. So how the future leaders in basically every discipline will be able to contribute to the prevention of future pandemics, because now we are really experiencing this is a very interdisciplinary problem. Really here, the political scientist needs to discuss equally with the epidemiologist and the virologist, but equally the economist has to be at the same table. So this really forces us to be able to collaborate from a scientific perspective. So this we have to give on and teach the upcoming intellectuals and the upcoming academic generation how to be able to better do such a collaboration.
Alicia, you had a hand up?
Yeah, I agree with everything Diana said. I think those are wonderful points, and I would offer two additional thoughts. One, to emphasize my passionate agreement with your point about having the public understand better why scientists might look at, how scientists look at conflicting evidence and resolve it, and why that conflicting evidence might arise in the first place. And I would just point to this required curriculum that all students at Bard take, our citizen science program, because that's actually exactly what we're focusing on. It's not about content. It's actually built around the idea that scientists answer questions in a handful of different ways, each of which has a strength and a weakness. And many of the hardest questions for us to deal with as a society arise from the fact that some questions that we most want to have answered cannot be answered with a simple experiment. Those include things like, are human activities causing global warming, global climate change? We want, what would make us feel most comfortable is if we could do a grand global experiment about that. But for logistical reasons, we can't create 6 replicate Earths and expose half of them randomly to carbon dioxide emissions and the other half not to. So we're left with other approaches that are easier for people who don't understand scientific uncertainty or who want to weaponize scientific uncertainty to attack the evidence that we have. And so that's exactly what we're going after with this mandatory common course on citizen science. And again, that kind of thinking, I think, could not be more useful in the current moment for understanding. We talk a lot about models. So why is it that different models predict different outcomes, and how do we reconcile the outcomes of those models and those kinds of things? So I wanted to make that point, that there are curricula around this that would be interesting for us to think about implementing at larger scales to help prepare ourselves for future moments when we have to deal with things like this. And the other point I wanted to make is that I think it's fairly common, at least in the United States, for there to be some tensions between local communities and their academic institutions that are embedded within them. We talk in the United States a lot about town-gown tensions, where universities have certain political and practical interests that don't necessarily align with those of the surrounding communities. We certainly have that in the region around Bard College to some extent. And I have seen this moment as a place where there are openings for those conversations, because the knowledge and the expertise that we have on our campuses have such tremendous value in our local and regional areas right now, that to the degree we can share what we have and make ourselves available to those communities, I think we can really show what a synergy between communities and the academic institutions that are embedded within them can look like. And this is a real moment for that.
Thank you. Fatima, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say that definitely research is the dire need of the hour. In this evidence-based era, how would we know that what is the treatment in terms of finding out the vaccine, finding out the treatment? We need randomized clinical trials, and our hands are tied up. Without research, we cannot come to conclusions. So all around the world, some people, like for example, earlier in some studies, they showed that certain medicines like chloroquine, malarial-based treatments are effective in COVID-19 treatment. Then the research came that no, it actually delays the recovery process. So we can't jump to conclusions unless we do randomized clinical trials, and research is the answer to our questions. So we at Zaudin University are taking up projects like association with different comorbids, like people, diabetic patients, cardiac patients, how to deal with COVID-19 in such patients, how are they prone to COVID-19 with such ailments. So there's so much that we do not know at the moment. We do not even know where it came from. So research is definitely what we need at this hour.
Hi, I just want to make a point. Am I on there? Yeah. Yeah, I just want to make a point where all my distinguished speakers have already done before me. I feel like in this era of deliberate misinformation, fake social news, and all this divisive political propaganda we have now in our hands. So in a way, this is devil in disguise or blessing in disguise. You have an opportunity right in our hands to rediscover science as the reliable arbitrator and also the guide to inform decision making. And therefore, I think moving forward, there is a big role for scientists to play in public debates as well as policy making. We will have to, your citizen course, citizen scientific course is really so important. And because university is a space where we are supposed to be encouraging new ideas, controversies, inquiry, argument, challenge, orthodox views, we are supposed to represent that. And with academic freedom, we have to totally optimize that opportunity. This is where people should feel safe that this is coming from a university. So therefore, research, teaching, it all informs, it is an information within the university that we are going to share with the community. So I think we in the university has a very big role to play to engage both ways. As scientists, people of science, to be able to come out and talk authentically about it. At the same time, be the propaganda, be the person who is spreading the propaganda of science, so that people will know this is coming from the university. It is not university top down, but this is a university where there is space to do all of those ideas. So, and therefore, moving forward, when we talk about how we can be more prepared in future pandemics, so because of science, hopefully because of science and good science, we'll be able to come up with some a warning system, who knows, with artificial intelligence. So this is where science comes in, and it offers hope for people to believe that there is something out there in the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there are a lot of things that we can also consider as the role of the university. Yeah, because as a higher educations, we emphasize a lot on service, research, and teaching. And I think because of the COVID pandemic, and then we work closely with the community, we understand more about their need. So that's also the time that we have to think about to strengthen the partnership with the community. For example, like, how we can encourage more faculty members to do community-based research. Yeah, and how we can actually get more funding in this area, and how we can also recognize our faculty members, because I know that not many universities, they also recognize faculty members, they do community engaged research. But I think this is also a time for us to think about what we can do. And then also promoting and also having our students to engage with the community is also the way forward that we should think about. Yeah, and then another aspect that I think is like today, we have people from around the world, and then we talk about this topic. And I think, you know, in the future, the mode of teaching and learning is totally different. Yeah, other than we mentioned about multidisciplinary, and we actually need to also think about the transdisciplinary, and not only within our university, but also across different universities. Because if we want to build up an ecosystem, it's not only in individual universities' effort. So we need to get other universities to work together, and also work with our local community and even regional community. So I really look forward to work with you all, and hope that, you know, we can build an ecosystem together. Yeah. And I also want to highlight one thing. Actually, I am working with another team that we are trying to build some curriculum online. Yeah, and to talk about how we can actually rethink of the global citizenship, because there's a lot of reflection for us during the COVID. Yeah, and I think when we, as the faculty members, we talk about community engagement, when we talk about our role in COVID-19, I think we are also educated. So what actually we can actually also create a platform for our students to learn, or we even co-learn or co-create curriculum together. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Those are fantastic ideas. I'm going to move to a couple of our audience questions. So one of the questions I think related to some of what we were talking about in terms of the role of science and public discourse and sort of evidence-based decision-making in public policy. How do we help our students deal with conflicting views? So how do we use what's happening kind of in the public, in the classroom, to help them work through how they should be making decisions based on conflicting views that they might be receiving from the media? And what approaches in our pedagogy and curriculum might we use to do this? Because we need students to be able to hold complexity and multiple viewpoints. Does anybody want to address that?
I'll tackle that and say maybe just a little bit more about the way that we're doing this in this citizen science class. As I mentioned, one of the things that we focus on is how scientists answer questions, and we simplify that down to saying that there are basically three ways. One is the way that everyone gets taught, which is that we do a carefully controlled experiment where we control all the variables and we impose a treatment. But actually scientists frequently can't do the experiment they want to do. And I outlined one kind of experiment we can't do, which is to create replicate Earths and add CO2 to some of them. They're just experiments that can't be done. You can think of lots of other experiments, like one that would be, what's the effect of a toxic chemical on people's health? We don't actually give the toxic chemical to people in an experimental way. We have to rely on other kinds of evidence. In the COVID world, that you can think of lots of things like this. There's active discussion right now around how we'll be able to test vaccines, because you might think about how you might do that if you have a candidate vaccine that you want to test in humans, one way you could do that would be to give the vaccine to people and then deliberately expose them to infection. But I think we all recognize that that is not a very ethical strategy, especially when you don't have a treatment. And so this is something that's being actively debated because of the importance of it. So understanding the strengths of experimental approaches in that strict scientific method way, but also understanding what scientists turn to when experiments aren't possible is super important. And I would identify those things as models, where we use models, including things like model systems, where we might do that vaccine trial on a non-human primate or a mouse model of some kind, and those model approaches have certain strengths and weaknesses. And then the third kind is to look at correlations. So this is how we're getting at these comorbidities, for example, that some of my fellow panelists have mentioned. That how do we know that people with diabetes are more susceptible? It's not because we experimentally infect people with diabetes and people without diabetes. It's because we're looking at correlations between people who particularly suffer and their underlying health conditions. And so if you understand the strengths and weaknesses of those three different approaches and then practice applying those to really difficult questions, it helps in a sort of bottom-up way understand how people can look at evidence from a scientific evidence and resolve it. I think there's another set of questions that Aaron's question via the audience raises, which is how we reconcile science-based points of view with economic points of view, which is a lot of what we're hearing, particularly in the United States right now. Like, we can't afford to save people's lives, which I find an astonishing view, and one that is abhorrent to me as being portrayed as a trade-off, because it doesn't have to be a trade-off. So I'll stop there, and I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say about this.
Dr. Ma, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I think in this, to tell our students, yes, these young scientists, we need to tell them in a scientific manner. For example, we can tell them that the gene, when they opened up COVID and did the gene sequencing, and they found out that it was very similar to the old SARS virus that came. So that is why we can convince students so that it is not fake, it is not bioengineered, it is something real. And, you know, evidence, again, research and evidence will convince people.
Thank you. Diana?
Thank you very much. Yes, this is clearly a very challenging question, since even among scientists, we don't necessarily have always the best vehicles and the best culture to deal with our scientific disagreements. So that's why what we try to do in our curriculum is that we give assignments where we encourage students to or make students to defend perspectives that they don't necessarily, scientific perspectives that they don't necessarily associate with. For example, in climate change, one would have to write an essay where you really argue to defend the perspectives of climate denials, or having active debates where you just randomly assign people for different scientific positions, and they have to defend that, and they have to together argue, and but at the same time try to perhaps arrive at a consensus. But I think another important thing is to teach them what mechanisms presently the world has to deal with such scientific multiplicities of scientific perspectives. And one of them is the institution of, for example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was precisely designed for supporting decision makers under multiple strains of evidence. And by now, the model of the IPCC has been so successful, excuse me, that it's being replicated in other disciplines, for example, for biodiversity, but it's also being replicated on a national scale or regional scale or even city scale. New York City, for example, has their New York City Panel on Climate Change, and so on. So what is the trick here is, first of all, the co-generation of knowledge, and also so you don't only let science alone to, oh, I'm the scientist and I tell you, the decision maker, what to do, but rather engage with the decision maker and really co-produce that knowledge and ask the scientific questions together. So that's already where it starts, how to ask the questions together and provide then the answers jointly. But also the multiple peer review phases, that also not only scientists are able to provide peer review comments, but also the decision makers. So they actively, and actually it has been, I'm a vice chair in the working group 3 of the IPCC, and it has been extremely beneficial to work with governments, and very often they give us more helpful, totally different perspectives, and really enrich also the research and the scientific perspectives. So I think we can teach the students already about the already existing models, institutional models that the world uses presently to deal with scientific uncertainty and multiplicity of scientific perspectives. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to respond? Yes, Swan.
Hi, I just want to add on to what Diana has just said. I think us, as she mentioned earlier, we're not just going to stand there and say, we are scientists, you got to listen to me. So I think us as academics, who may or may not be scientists, we have a very strong role to play in terms of facilitation. We have to facilitate the discovery of knowledge. We have to facilitate, draw it out until the students discover it for themselves in an authentic manner. So if they are able to discover it that way, then they don't have to take it lying down, so to put it. So in that sense, we are helping in terms of facilitating decision making. It's not top down. We are not being instructional. We are not being prescriptive. So I think the role as a teacher or faculty would have to be very facilitative, facilitatory. That's one. The other thing I wanted to mention is reflection, because the question that was asked via the Q&A was, how do we help the students to see what is right or wrong? I mean, in terms of science decision making. Experiential learning is one way of looking at things, whereby students are engaged into hands-on, on the ground, and then the cycle of experiential learning then feeds back into informing them what may be right or is right in an authentic manner. Reflective learning was what I wanted to say earlier. Reflection, I feel, facilitating reflection for the students, it's a very authentic way of discovering things by the students for themselves. So again, the facilitation, how you draw out that reflection, because a blind man wouldn't know what he's missing. He wouldn't. So we, the other opposite to that, we will have to draw it out from the students without, and we have to refrain from providing answers. Really refrain. So we have to draw out and make them think a little bit more about, do you think this is right or wrong? What do you think if you did this? What do you think was the answer? So that sort of facilitating draws out until the time when they discover it for themselves. I think that point is very, very fulfilling. The last thing I wanted to say about this is perhaps our role as community engagement. Perhaps we could provide exposure, opportunities for exposure to a number of perspectives, be it in the classroom or outside the classroom, so that it is more authentic. And I feel this is very important, because when students make decisions in future, they will have to make it within a context and not theoretically downloaded from somewhere as how they've been taught to. So if we give them, we marry the exposures or the perspectives together, they will be able to keep contextualizing it. So this is what I wanted to share. I feel might be good learning pedagogy without so many names, but personally, I feel this is how we are doing in our university. And students, hard as it may seem like, but the students do appreciate it finally when they discover the truth, and then it becomes unbendable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol, yes, please.
I just want to echo what you mentioned. I totally agree with you. Our role is facilitation. Yeah, and other than that, I think the whole process of learning, even ourselves, we are actually also learning. Yeah, we are always do the reflections when we actually do reflection with our students. So it's a process of self-discovery. Yeah, and so I think this kind of process is, we all need to understand, it's not only, whether we teach our students or work with the community partners. If we all have this kind of, process of reflections and try to critique ourselves and what we see, and then so we can actually make a transformative decision or, co-create something together with faculty members and also the community. Because most of the time, maybe in the past, people will think that faculty members, you actually have the knowledge of power. But actually, we all understand that in the community, we can also learn from them, and then even our students. So if we have this kind of mindset, and then I'm sure that, the whole education sector will be a bit different. Yeah, but at the same time, again, the process of self-discovery is a very precious learning for all of us. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, or a little bit past. I just, in terms of communicating and community outreach, maybe our final remarks can be related to how either leadership of the, in the executive leadership of an institution, can help facilitate communication, or faculty can help facilitate communication with community. How can we get the word out to the community, and how do we identify our community partners to make sure we're engaging with all perspectives, I guess, in the community? So this is the last question. And I just want to thank you all for this. And I wish we could go on much longer. I think we have much to say. Maybe we'll turn this into a conference, a digital conference of some kind. Anyone who wants to begin.
Can I start? Yeah. So I think like what I have been doing, I think I'm so happy that I can work with my colleagues in the university. My CorpCom actually is very supportive. Yeah, when I have any new ideas, then I talk to the CorpCom representative, and then so she will help me, to work out the press release and work with the media. And after that, we were interviewed by different radio and then also newspapers about our work. And then we also post up to different social media. Yeah, and then we actually work with our partners. We cannot do our thing, all the thing by ourselves, because we all work from home. So we work with our stakeholders. We have division of labor. And then every time when we have webinars, and our partners, they will actually consolidate and edit it into a video format and then put on the Facebook also. So that's why other people, they can also see. So I think as an academic, if we do research, we actually definitely can actually share to the public, but you need partners in the university, and that can also help you to comment the message. Yeah, but of course, we also use our personal social media account to also promote. But again, you need to find partners, because otherwise you will be very alone. Yeah, and so stakeholders, of course, community partners, and also within university, especially the communication department, because they could be very, very helpful. And then all my work, I have been also talking to my boss, and then so he know what I've been doing, and then if I need any resources, then I can also talk to him. So that's actually what I feel very grateful, because in this time we understand that we all want to do something and contribute to the society, and so the support from the senior management is super important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Diana, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I fully agree. And I just want to add one little thing and one larger thing. The little thing is the social media. I think it's a very new phenomenon in science communication, and how much we as a scientist or persons have to communicate on social media. I think we need more discussions on that. What is responsible engagement in the social science, in the social media for us as scientists. And how to distinguish between our personal perspectives and the scientific perspectives and these personas on the social media. But I think the bigger issue is what I don't remember who, but one of my distinguished panelists colleagues have mentioned is citizen science. I think that's really important, because that's a way to communicate and to engage, because again, communication is the same with the community as with a decision maker. It's not only us telling you that we are the smart guys and you just listen. But if we engage the community actively, for example, in research, or then they will appreciate research more, they will appreciate science more. It will be much easier for them to listen to evidence if they are part of some of the exercise. So I think we do need to have concerted efforts at engaging with schools and the communities, not only in a one-directional way, but also in a mutually beneficial, bi-directional ways of communication. Thank you.
Swan, and then Felicia, and then Fatima, we'll have you bring it all together.
Okay, I just want to, thank you. I just want to add into what Diana has just said. I think this COVID situation, pandemic, has fast forward for us that it is so important to engage with the community beyond what we used to call corporate social responsibility, charity, volunteer work. we have to move beyond that, because public knowledge, public education, it's so important to handle a pandemic like this, in terms of preparedness now forward, or in terms of when the tragedy is right on our doorsteps. During those moments, a simple act of charity, which is still important, is not going to save the skin very much. So I think moving forward in terms of preparedness, we have to build that sort of create platforms within the university, create platforms of engagement with the greater community, within, inside, and outside. And like Carol was saying, it is so imperative that we have support from our senior management. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia?
I think my colleagues have made wonderful points here. The one I think I would say something that's similar to what other people are saying, and that is that good communication with the community is built on the same things that all good communication is built on, and that is relationships. And those are two-way relationships. So it's about our communicating with our communities, but also listening to what they have to say. And it's also about not just communicating when we need something, but also building relationships that that have really strong foundations and that are ongoing, not just that pop up again when we need something or when the community needs something from us. It's really about seeing these long-term partnerships.
Yes, I think that universities have to collaborate with the communities, and it's all about collaboration. Collaboration means mutual interest of both the parties. So we have to engage them, and they have to be the stakeholders. It's just not unidirectional dictatorship. They have to contribute to the mutual benefit of both the parties. So it's all what COVID-19 has actually taught us. It has taught us engagement with the university, with the communities, and how to move forward with their contribution, with their new ideas. And believe me, they've got tremendous ideas. People who are even illiterate would give you tremendous ideas of how to go forward, how to bring amendments to the current structure, both in terms of teaching as well as healthcare perspectives. So it's all about, we have to now engage everybody, come on a common platform. That is what I want to say.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Does anybody have any last words they want to share? I just want to thank the panelists for a really engaging, and like I said, I would love to continue the conversation in the future. I do want to mention the Student Engagement Award that is available to undergraduate students. It's part of the pilot program that we have between the Open Society University Network and the Telwar Network. So member universities are, students in those member universities are eligible to apply for funding to support community engagement that they are doing either in response to COVID or work that they were doing before and then pivoted their work in response to COVID. As you've said, all of you have highlighted the importance of a collaborative, relationship-based engagement with community and students, and we see this award as the opportunity for students to really learn and understand how that needs to work. I want to, one phrase one of the panelists used, we need to preserve the culture of change. I think that is how I want to end us today, and that we don't want to lose sight of the lessons that we're learning. And we need to quickly integrate these thoughts, ideas, all of this into how we do our practice moving forward. And those changes need to be permanent. It's hard for us all within these institutions that have existed for a long time to really, make those changes in such quick succession to one another. And so I think that it's important for us to think about how to become more nimble and flexible and creative in order to try to integrate these changes on a permanent basis, which I think is much harder and something that we're all going to be challenged with doing. So I just, again, want to thank all of you. This was fascinating. I think that these sorts of discussions across time zones, regions, geographies, disciplines, is one of the opportunities that COVID has brought us. So I very much appreciate your time and your energy, your participation, your brilliance, and I'm fascinated and hope to stay in touch with all of you. And thank you to our audience for staying with us, and have a good rest of either your evening or your morning, depending on, or your afternoon, depending on where you are. So again, thank you all so much, and I look forward to more.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Keep
Thank
in
you,
touch.
everybody, and thank you for
Keep in
listening.
touch.
to us.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.